To do that for some stupid reason.
I used to do that, and then I've butchered it every single time. So we're recording now. So hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 165 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is October 7th, 2019. I am Rollo McFlugel of McFlugel.com, and Slappy Jones, too, will not be with us tonight. He was late on his daily affirmation of tractors, and so I kicked him off the show. So the show notes page, exactly. Show notes page for this episode is mcflugel.com/165, where you will be able to find links to the things we talk about, as well as checking out libertymugs.com, where you can buy some awesome libertarian-themed mugs, stickers, and shirts, and some other stuff. And also ways to check out our guest, the Empress of Memes, Mel. So welcome to the Rollo and Slappy Show, Mel.
Hello. I had a plan to swoop in and say tractor before you, and you just ruined it.
Well, I appreciate. You know what? You can be the new co-host because you obviously care more about the things I care about than the previous one. So.
Yeah, I was gonna frame it with like the prison thing, like if somebody stole your tractor, would the prison get it back? And
you could still use it.
Okay.
For maybe for all of our thought experiments, we'll use tractors.
I like it.
Okay, perfect. So we're having Mel on the show because of, as I'm sure anyone listening to the show is aware of, we recently had the end of the trial and the conviction of Amber Guyger, who was convicted of murdering Botham Jean. And so we wanted to get her thoughts, or have Mel explain kind of everything what happened, including the trial, because she spent a lot of time with this case, and so she knows a lot about it, a lot more than I do. I haven't been following it nearly as closely as she has, so I wanted to pick her brain about it. And then we also wanted to transition and kind of how this kind of impacted us and the way we think about a lot of this stuff, kind of in an unexpected way that happened, but we'll get into it. So, Mel, do you want to just kind of give the background on this case, exactly what happened?
Yeah. So Amber Guyger is a 31-year-old off-duty Dallas police officer who is still in uniform when she claims she mistook Botham Jean's apartment, 26-year-old Botham Jean's apartment, for her own, and she walked in and shot him because she claims that she thought he was a burglar. This happened pretty common, not the shooting part, but in this apartment complex, the floors and everything looked a lot alike. So it was a pretty common occurrence that people would mistake other people's apartments for theirs. Botham Jean's apartment door lock just happened to be broken that day, and it didn't lock, and she happened to have the training to be able to react fast enough and kill him.
So it's
Sorry.
No, I mean that's what happened, right? So she's a police officer, and we're libertarians, and our reaction is another cop killed someone else. How reasonable is it that you would walk into an apartment and just like shoot something? Like I don't know. I don't know that would be my reaction walking into an apartment, especially if both of them sitting there in his apartment. It's not like he's going to, or maybe he might have reacted a little bit aggressively because he sees an intruder in there. But I don't know that I would probably be a lot more shocked and surprised. Like, do you have any insight, like what happened, what came out during the trial of why she reacted the way she did?
First, I think her training was sort of a double-edged sword in this instance. Because of her training, she was able to react so quickly. But because of her training, she shouldn't have acted so quickly. Right. I don't I personally don't feel like both of them charged at her. He had on, and this came out in the trial, he had on AirPods, like Apple AirPod headphones,
Hmm.
and he was, the positioning of his body showed that he was either crouching or cowering behind like a counter. So I don't think that he probably charged at her, but I do
Right.
think that at the very least, walking to the wrong floor or the apartment was pretty common. It happened 93 times with other tenants in the complex.
Do you know over what period? The
They,
96?
I don't think they said, but
Okay, but
the
that's
apartment
that's
has made
that's
changes, so I think that that was a little bit way for them to admit some fault in that.
right. Yeah, I mean it's because that was one of the things that everyone was talking about. Like, how could you not know it was your apartment? I mean, I've never lived in an apartment, so it would be difficult for me to walk into the wrong house. Um,
I
although
do
I
think it's
did
a little bit
almost,
outrageous that she missed so many signs,
sure.
but it happened.
Right. I mean, she was saying, what was she saying? That she was tired and, didn't understand what was necessarily going on because of that. Was she work? Was she coming home from work?
Yeah, she worked 13.5 hours that day. She claims she was tired, but she had made plans to go to the gym and meet up with her partner after work. So there was some doubt with whether or not she was tired or not.
Hmm. Okay.
But she could have been playing on her phone or something. I mean, she missed the parking garage where she normally parks is open air, but the third floor where she parked was closed in. One of her neighbors has a large planter. There were the apartment numbers, I guess, are lit up. They're not just like on my apartment, it's like a little metal piece.
Hmm.
It's not like that. There was like a bright red floor mat, and then he smoked marijuana, and she didn't. So that smell would have, you would think, would have triggered some sort of reaction.
Right. Right. So, I mean, she did get convicted of murder. A lot of people reacted by saying that, well, because murder is tough to convict, especially in a situation like this. It's pure she said. I mean, there is no he said, unfortunately, here because, of course, both of them died. Um, but can you explain a little bit why she was even? Because my initial reaction, like I said, a lot of other people had was, well, it makes sense to have manslaughter, but murder, I mean, that's like premeditated, and that seems like it would be hard to get a murder conviction. But and if they charge her for murder and they don't get it, then it seems like, oh, another cop gets away with killing someone where it would have been more likely instead of swinging for the fence to go for manslaughter. Okay, so can you explain what happened there with that? Because I think a lot of people are maybe missing the reasoning behind all that.
At first they charged her with manslaughter, but then a panel reviewed a bunch of evidence and changed it. They increased it to the murder charge. Plus, there was a lot of activism around it that wanted the murder charge. In Texas, you don't have to have premeditation or motive even to be convicted of murder. All you have to have is intent, and she expressly stated that in the trial.
Yeah, that was a little bit weird because they said like when you pointed the gun and pulled the trigger at him, did you intend to kill him? And she said yes. Which
Yeah,
of
that was all.
of course, I mean, of course, that's why you point a gun and pull a trigger at someone. I mean, it seems that doesn't necessarily seem like the greatest of laws. I mean, I don't know much about Texas murder law. This is my really some of my first experience with it. But it just seems like that's right there. She's guilty of murder no matter what, right? I mean,
Right. I think what they were going for, her defense was mistake of fact was the first one, and then self-defense was if she got the mistake of fact, then which that was, did she think what she did was lawful because of a set of circumstances existed, and the set
Mhm.
of circumstances was, did she think that she was actually in her apartment? And if the jury believed the mistake of fact, then it was reasonable that she acted in self-defense.
Okay. So, okay.
And the prosecutor made a really good point in his closing statements that if she her keys were left in the door, so she had to realize that the door was cracked and maybe something was going on. She claimed she heard movement inside, so she had to make the decision to go inside
Mhm.
instead of retreating. And I think that maybe that was, I guess, the nail in her coffin, just because there was a lot of evidence there.
So her keys were in the door? I didn't know.
Yeah, so the apartment complex, the doors have key fobs. It's not like a card. It's like a maybe one like you would have for your car. You stick it in the lock and it can hang there.
Oh,
So
okay. So it's not a traditional key where it wouldn't have even, it wouldn't have worked at all.
correct. It's like electronic and it sends a signal. So she was fiddling with it, which it would have given like a red light where it was rejecting the key. And
Hmm.
while fiddling with it, she pushed the door, like the door pushed open a little bit.
Right. Um, I mean, and I know I keep, it sounds like I'm defending her. But I'm just trying to play devil's advocate and trying to do this as a uh, what's it called? Kind of neutral, not have any biases.
Well, on
Um,
Instagram, I was accused of that when just going through like the facts of the case,
right,
people
yeah.
kept telling me, it sounds like you're defending her. It's like, well, no, I'm just saying what happened.
Yeah, we're just trying to piece together, the facts best we can. I mean, it's like I said before, it's basically she said. Yeah, there's a couple of
Right.
witnesses, I guess, but not directly witnessing everything what happened. So that's that. I mean, you just brought a couple new pieces of information that I wasn't aware of, which makes it a little more reasonable that she would go into the wrong apartment. Um, Interesting that never got brought out, like the key fob thing, and I can't remember what was the first thing I didn't know. Oh, that there were 93 other instances of going into the wrong apartment.
Yeah, that was something I never knew either. And I think when just watching the trial, there were so many things that, like, I noticed a lot of the media reporting on it was pretty sensationalized. And I just learned so much watching every second of the trial.
Right. Um, and well, that was the point I was going to say. A lot of libertarian, like you said, that it was the prosecution brought up the fact that she didn't retreat. She decided to go in when she heard some noises. Um, I mean, I think I know a lot of people, especially the gun-toting type, um,
Right.
would probably tend to be a little bit confrontational when they think it's their property uh getting getting touched. I mean, maybe not. I hope not. I think it's better, even if you are armed, to just retreat back and get some cover or whatever you got to do, as opposed to kind of go barging in and either putting yourself in harm's way, or having a mistake like this happen and having an innocent person end up getting killed, or anyone getting killed for that matter. Um,
So a big part of the trial was her police training. She was a member of the like a crime response team that was she had like 3,500 hours of training, and there were two parts of her training, and the first one was like their code of conduct where she's always, even when she's off duty, she should follow the standard operating procedures of the crime response team. And they have what's called like a barricaded person procedure, and that's what he's not. And I really hate saying that. That's what he was, but he was, if that was her apartment, he would be considered a barricaded person. And the standard operating procedure for that is to retreat, call for backup, and it's like retreat and then take cover and call for
right,
backup.
right, which would make sense, especially you're walking into something you don't really know. I mean, they could be sitting there with a couple guns pointed at the door as soon as you open it, or
All
even
of the officers are sent home with a police, like a personal issued police radio that they can use to call for help, and it comes much faster than just dialing 911. So she had that on her, and she could have easily just retreated and used that, but she chose not to. She chose to enter the apartment.
Hmm.
And I think that was a big focus and probably something the jury put a lot of weight into.
Sure. So, speaking of calling for help, once she enters the apartment and shoots both of them, there was a lot of discussion about how she reacted there. So can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, she shot him. She sat her first aid kit next to his body. She called 911 and she said she thought it was the wrong apartment. And she said that, obviously she said that there was a big controversy. She kept worrying about her job. She claims to have given some sort of first aid. In the trial, she said sternum rubs, but there were no signs of that. And
Mhm.
she happened to be texting at the same time that she was on the 911 call. So she called 911. Their response time was 2 minutes, which was pretty fast.
Yeah.
So the first responders showed up. They removed her from the area and then tried to save Botham's life. They didn't even know that the first aid supplies were there, so they tried to use some of the things from his own apartment to save his life, but that didn't work. And they have body cam footage for all of that too. I don't recommend it.
Yeah. I'm not sure I want to see that.
It's really sad.
Yeah. So, she was texting her partner, right?
Yeah, she was she
The
was telling me
romantic partner, right? Not or
both.
what was it? It was both.
He
That's
was
right.
her married partner on the job and romantic partner.
Hmm.
She was texting him to come there. She said, "Come here, hurry," or something like that. Maybe I need you, hurry.
And again, to play devil's advocate, and anyone can feel free to buy this or say I'm being an idiot, but I mean, when something very traumatic happens, someone's reaction isn't necessarily always going to be what you would do sitting on your couch, with the armchair quarterback kind of perspective of it. Um, I don't know that my reaction would be that, oh no, I might lose my job, but I mean, your brain's going 1,000 miles a minute, your heart's probably beating out of your chest, you're experiencing, incredible emotional and mental stress. I've been in situations of great tragedy, and I look back on it and feel like terrible about some of the stuff I said during it because my brain was just mush. And, it's just, I don't know.
I know
Uh,
we'll get into it a little bit later, but you're right. And to I started feeling a little bit conflicted with, like my own thoughts watching the trial when the prosecutor, like the whole idea of like uniform remorse, everybody's going to act the same
mhm.
after a tragedy. I do think that's a good point to bring up, that not everybody will.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it in all sorts of situations with all different sorts of people. People grieve very differently or just deal with stressful situations very differently. You see people that remain very calm and can function pretty well, and then you see people that instantly get hysterical and lose their minds, and you're unable to deal with them in all levels of stress, whether it's just a minor thing or even a very major thing. So um, it's tough. I mean, again, I know that the reaction from libertarians, because cops do a lot of bad stuff and they have a bad job, and no one's going to defend um, all of that, the bad stuff that they do. But I'm just trying to be as objective as I can with this because, I mean, it's one of the weird things is that, all right, it's still in the U.S. government criminal justice system. Um, I have a hard
Injustice.
yeah, I have a hard time saying that we ever get wins out of that. And maybe I might be jumping a little bit ahead on myself a little bit, but do you want to talk about the sentencing? She got 10 years, right?
Right. And to the last point, I think on the one hand, there's the uniform remorse thing, but on the other, she did remember all of her training that went into like that revolved around taking a life and none of it that revolved around like saving a life. And I think that's a pretty big indictment of our current like police culture. But both things are important to keep in mind.
Right. Do you have any idea if she had been involved in shooting anyone before?
Yeah, she shot at somebody. He didn't die. Her partner actually killed somebody before. She shot at somebody who I think they said he was trying to take a weapon away from another officer, and she shot at him. And there was an internal affairs review, and they found no wrongdoing.
Okay.
Standard.
Okay. I mean, that if she had done it before, if she had shot and killed someone before, or shot someone before and reacted totally differently, then it might be like, what's the difference here? Um, but okay, that kind of checks out then. So
I
yeah, do you
don't
want
think the judge allowed much about that into the trial. That's just something you have to find out looking into it
to?
yourself.
Okay. Yeah, and I could see that, because that's, whether or not you did something in the past is not necessarily an indictment on your current. It's like if you're on trial for stealing a tractor, you don't bring up, oh, he stole a tractor before. Well, he's not on trial for stealing the tractor from before. He's on trial for stealing
Right.
the tractor now. But you want to go into the in the sentencing because I think a lot of people were expecting her to not be convicted. So when they saw that she was convicted, they kind of, were celebrating the conviction, but then got upset with the sentencing.
Yeah, so the judge, I think to the important things with the guilty verdict and the sentencing to bring up, the first one's the castle doctrine. The judge allowed them, well, the defense fought for the judge to allow castle doctrine to be considered, and that's just if somebody breaks into your home, you have a right to defend yourself. So if they decided on the mistake of fact that she did think that was her home, would then castle doctrine apply? And obviously the jury rejected that. Uh, but the judge, she gets a lot of heat, and I don't think that without this judge, Amber Guyger would have been acquitted because she ruled a lot of times in favor of the prosecution and against Amber Guyger.
Hmm.
That's part of the sensationalized things that happened in the media that I just found a little odd. And then in sentencing, they wanted to allow sudden passion. The defense, the entire time, tried to say that when you go from this calm, resting state where you're on your way home, you just finished a long shift and you're tired, and then all of a sudden your heart starts beating really fast, uh, that played into her reaction. Um, that's another thing. If these weren't considered, it would have been a slam dunk reversal on appeal. So um, they in the prosecution they didn't want a fine considered for. They said that the Jean family doesn't get the fine, so they didn't even ask for a fine. They did ask for 28 years because that's how old Botham Jean was. um, I was reading afterwards that the jury had considered the life that Botham lived, and they felt that 10 years was adequate sentence.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so one of the things too that had me confused is some people were suggesting that she wanted to kill him, like for whatever reason, like it was a murder. Was there anything like a murder as in, she knew what she was doing and went in there that, she was walk into that apartment with the intent to go kill him? Um, did you get Was that really discussed by the prosecution at all? Was that ever really brought up? Was that ever seriously considered, or was that kind of some fantasizing by
Uh,
some people?
I believe that was just fantasizing. The prosecutor made pretty clear that there was no relationship. They brought in it was like the boss landlord, I don't know what, the manager of the apartment. There were
Hmm.
no complaints ever filed by anybody against both of them. I think one of the things that I saw people floating around was that she complained about his vacuum cleaner or something like that, but
Mm,
there was absolutely no evidence of any relationship or complaints or
okay,
problems with each other.
got it. So, um, and this is really kind of where I'm much more interested in talking about this was during I guess it was after the sentencing when they had the family be able to give a statement about stuff, and Jean said something that made its rounds uh, around the internet and really was a powerful thing. So you want to talk about what he said and did?
Yeah, I think going to like going into the sentencing, the when they were talking about what sentence she should get, that entire day was extremely emotional. The
Hmm.
dad talked about, raising both of them, and he sobbed on the stand, and the mom talked, and the best friend talked, and she sobbed. So it was like an incredibly emotional day. And then you get Jean, the younger brother, up there, and he had said he forgave her and he loved her like any other person. Um, and he didn't want her to go to jail. And then he asked her and then pleaded with her if he could give her a hug. And the judge cryingly said yes. And Guyger pretty much ran to him and then they hugged for like a minute and
Hmm.
she just kind of sobbed. It
Yeah.
was really rough to watch.
Yeah, it was pretty powerful, and it changed. Like it's amazing how much of an impact that could have on complete strangers, including myself. Um, I mean, first of all, the the kind of man that showed, and I think he's 18, right?
Yep.
That
And
yeah,
he didn't talk to his parents about it, and
hmm,
he knew that they could absolutely be upset with him for it.
yeah, yeah. Like he's there aren't many people like him, and he's only 18, but I mean that's a role model for anyone, no matter how old you are, to be able to forgive someone who just killed your brother. I know that's again. I'm saying I'm gonna this is I'm gonna be saying a lot of unpopular things potentially in this episode. So, but
Same.
I don't care. I mean, because part of it is that um, as libertarians, we tend to get very hyper focused on the non-aggression principle, and that's not, the non-aggression principle is a very good guideline. It's very good to follow. I'm not denigrating it at all, um, but a lot of people tend to act like the non-aggression principle is like really the only thing you need. Um, but the non-aggression principle only tells you what you can't do to each other. It doesn't really tell you how to live the quote unquote good life. And so to me, libertarianism is really inadequate in giving you clues or ideas of how to live a fulfilling life. I know Tom Woods talked about this before, where he's just like, all right, so you lived your life and you follow the non-aggression principle. So you just said you never hurt anybody. All right, well, wow, congratulations. Like that's that's not that impressive. Like what do you do with your life to make the world a better place? I mean, I feel
Mhm.
like we as human beings kind of have that drive to to find fulfillment and happiness. And so being able to forgive, I think, is an important part of that. Um, So just to react to that and just be like, well, she committed a crime, she did something bad, and she should be punished and not have, any sympathy expressed towards her. I don't know. I think that just makes you kind of stew in your anger and not have a productive, you know, it's not very productive. It just holding in all that anger and everything, I don't think is healthy. Um, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Am I being a lefty idiot hippie? Or
No, absolutely not. I felt pretty conflicted, and I know I talked to you guys a lot about it for the whole trial because I oppose everything about this criminal injustice system. And the when it started out, I was just like cheering for a prosecutor and
hmm
rooting for a judge and wanting to see this person punished. And then they started throwing around years like 28 years and 99 years, and I just kind of had to take pause, like, what is it that I'm actually rooting for? And I guess I felt for a second that my commitment to prison abolition was weak, and I think it's pretty ingrained in us to think that the criminal justice system is the only way to hold somebody accountable and to express our disapproval with violence. And as anarchists, we should definitely just take pause and consider other options, not violent.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I know people will say like, oh, well, what do you, because that's the reaction I was getting a lot. Like, oh, you just want murderers and rapists to not have to deal with the consequences and run around the street. It's like, no, I don't want, obviously, I don't want that. I mean, just because I say that I don't think prison's a good solution doesn't mean I don't want consequences. I don't want justice. I don't want restitution. I don't know what the solution is necessarily. I mean, I have some ideas. I think if you look up Bob Murphy's talks about prisons and justice, criminal justice in a free society, I'll try to link to that in the show notes page. I think he gives a very good talk about how insurance companies would handle this, and do it much better without all the problems with a monopoly that the government has on it. Um, but at the same, but also, I think that Amber Guyger is dealing with the punishment of what she did already. Watching that video of her hugging Brandt, she just, and also in the just pictures and video of her throughout the trial with the way she just looks like a completely broken human being. Um,
Absolutely.
and I'm not one to get offended by memes or anything, and I'm not going around wagging my finger about it. But when I see people kind of taking pot shots at her being in that state, it's kind of like, you know, she did a bad thing. Um, Only Amber Guyger knows what's in Amber Guyger's heart, but we're allowed to make some judgments on what we see. And to me, it really seems like that she is very remorseful for what happened. That is not probably what she intended to do when she was driving home from work that day, making her plans for the rest of the night. And I think that has to be considered when we're looking at these things. I mean, what does putting her in prison do other than satisfying some bloodlust? I mean, it doesn't help her out. It's prison. A prison sentence is a very dehumanizing thing. You lose your rights as a
Absolutely.
human being. You get thrown in with people that just have no hope, that are barely treated as humans in a corrupt system with corrupt guards. Just a place, just an awful, awful place. Um, that's no restitution to the Jean family. That's really no restitution or help to the rest of society by just putting people in a in a uh, crime creating rape cage is what prison is
Right.
really. Not saying that there's never a time to incarcerate someone, but as a general rule, I mean, I don't know a prison sentence is going to do is going to make this situation any better.
I
I
think
mean,
it's, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that we have to remember that although Amber Guyger is a cop, and I'm sure that she has done a lot of the normal cop things, which are bad and evil, she's still a human being. And those were bad things that she did, mistakes that she's made, and I'm not defending any of the bad things that she did, whether it was shooting Botham or any of her activities as a police officer. But she's a human being, and I do think that human beings really always kind of deserve that the ability to have some redemption, to seek forgiveness, to be sorry for what they did to change their lives around. And I mean, I really I really hope that the the compassion that Brant showed her by forgiving her and saying what he did and giving her the hug, maybe that maybe that changed her life and gave her a little bit of hope and is going to put her on a path that she wouldn't have otherwise had. So um, maybe right now isn't the time to be dumping all over Amber Guyger. Maybe it's an opportunity for the rest of us to show compassion and realize that people do bad things, but do we really want to say that you never deserve forgiveness or never done anything bad? I mean, I've never killed someone. I've never been a cop, so I've never done those things. But I know everyone's not religious here, but I forget who said it, but I think it was one of the saints said that if God were to show you your life of sin, that you would have like 1,000 heart attacks over all the evil you've committed. And this is for the average person. So I appreciate people showing me forgiveness for all the things I've done and hope for compassion and mercy. So if I can't show it to other people, even when it's the most difficult to, then I don't ever see why I would deserve it. Sorry, I kind of went off on 8,000 tangents there.
I think that it's an indictment of the police state that we live in, that people will, first off, like they centered the criminal and justice system as the only way that Amber Guyger could be held accountable. And then second of all, they think that 10 years is a light prison sentence. It's not. Um, and it's important to remember that abolitionist mechanisms would have demanded accountability for Botham Jean and their family a little sooner. Um, Brant Jean seemed open to the idea, and then Alice and Jean, I keep saying their last name wrong, Jean, sh afterwards she made some comments that, Dallas isn't done yet. Basically, like there's still corruption that was through the whole thing. You saw this corruption, and I think that they were both open to maybe some sort of restorative justice or transformative justice. And I know before the podcast we were talking about how 84 people have been killed by police in Texas since Botham Jean's murder, and shifting the blame from, I guess, the prison system and the criminal justice system to Amber Guyger's something that's going to allow this same scenario to repeat itself 1,000 times before the next officer is actually held accountable. And this is going to be one of those things where they tokenize it as an example of how their system works. And I think if instead we did like, there's I guess in just like in Ferguson and Oakland and also in Dallas, there's been certain cases where activists afterwards, they didn't fight for these prison sentences, they fought for other things. Like in Dallas, there's like a big they have the most police shootings during calls for like mental health instances, like if there's like a mental health call. So there was one that was really bad, and instead of calling for that guy to be arrested, he was fired, but he wasn't indicted. And the activists, they fought for, instead of police responding to mental health calls, they got like a mental health team to respond to them. And
Right.
I think that's a really good reaction to something like that. In Oakland, I think it's Oakland. There's a guy. His last name's Delgado. He was an undocumented person. He was shot 99 times, and instead of calling, relying on the system, they called for defunding police and no more like militarization, no more new weapons, no more new tech for these departments, and I just like taking away power from the police unions. And I think those were all pretty good reactions that didn't rely on the system to get accountability.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing on how to handle these things because um, I mean the state is the state, and the state's always going to take any opportunity that it can to amass more power, um, and just do crazy things. So it's tough. I mean, it's tough to know what's the best outcome for this. There's a couple things too. Um, and well, first of all, I think you nailed it by saying this is, while this should be an indictment of the system, it's just going to be an indictment on the individual and say that, oh, it was just this one individual messed up. But I think it's pretty clear that, and as well with it seems like a lot of other police wrongdoing, they're victims too. Um, it's kind of interesting that a lot of libertarians, we can look at the military and see all the bad things that they do, just a lot of times fairly indiscriminate killing of people overseas. And we can look at the soldiers who are doing the actual killing and say, hey, you know what? They were brainwashed. Um, they're victims too. Now, obviously, they did bad things. Um, you know, should they be held accountable to some degree? Maybe. But we can say that the people putting in them in those positions are the ones that are doing the true evil. Um, why don't we extend that to the police too? Um, it's the same kind of thing. I remember I grew up, I wanted to be a cop. I thought it was, that's the wearing the uniform and he's got the gun and he's law and order protecting everybody. I mean, you're a kid, you look up to those people. And did Amber Guyger like always wanted to be a cop too? I heard.
Yeah, that was one of the things it struck me as just crazy during the trial. They said that she wanted to be a cop from the age of 6 years old. And I
Wow.
just couldn't help but think there's some pretty powerful forces out there that are brainwashing kids into wanting to go into those career paths. And it takes a lot to, I mean, even with all of the killing that goes on today by police, it's still taboo to criticize them. And I just think that's something, maybe a conversation we should be having like we do with the military.
Well, it's even a lot of like the minarchists and libertarians that aren't quite all the way to anarchists. They're the law and order libertarians. That the last thing they want to give up is the police because they still have that. That's how pervasive it is and how strong those feelings are. That propaganda. The police are actually the good guys and doing all the good things. Is that even people that believe in the non-aggression principle, believe that taxation is theft, believe in private property, still hold on and say, well, really, it's the government should have the police. Maybe we shouldn't. Uh, you know, the police aren't the bad guys that you ANCAPs are saying they are. Um, so I don't know why. I have some guesses for why that soldiers get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, but the police don't. Is that the police are doing this on our home soil in the same geographical landmass. We can relate to it a little bit more. Soldiers typically aren't shooting and killing American citizens, so I get that, but at the same time, it's really kind of the same principles at play. Um, so it's yeah. To anyone listening who's getting concerned, be like, "Oh, is Rollo no longer against the monopoly?" No, of course not. I haven't changed any of my beliefs on whether or not the police are doing good or bad. It's just that I think we have to take a little bit different of an approach. Um,
One thought that I had, and I really hope I don't get a lot of hate for it, but I don't know if you read the American Privilege piece that Caitlin Johnson wrote about how our reactions are to domestic policy versus foreign policy. But I wonder if part of that is with the police abuse cases, they're very humanized. We know their names, we know their families, we watch their sentencing. But with the people who are being slaughtered overseas, we don't really, it might be easier to give the people who do that a pass because we don't really have like names to all of them, maybe.
right.
It's
No,
just an
yeah, no,
idea. I'm not
I think that's
positive, but
absolutely the case because that's why we criticize the left on when they flip out over domestic issues, but then don't really care that President Obama was dropping, what was it, 26,000 bombs in his last year as president,
right.
because it's on the other side of the world. They don't, it's difficult it is difficult to care about things that, so while it's a lot more easy to care about something where the victim looks like you, has the same interests, has the same hobbies, goes to similar restaurants as you, watches the same movies, you can relate to them more. So I understand that. And the other thing too is that I'm not saying that every time that the police do something bad, we hear because there's going to be another example of a police officer killing someone and the police circling the wagons and defending them no matter what. I'm not saying don't get mad. There's being angry or any emotion, any human emotion exists for a reason. It has useful purposes. So if things are messed up and someone's not being held accountable at all, get mad. I'm not saying, you should always just say, well, do the whole, whoa, you didn't see the other side of the video, which, can be the case sometimes. But, still react strongly to things. But when it's clear that, all right, I think in this case, it looks like it was a mistake. Obviously, Guyger did something very bad and very wrong. But, was it evil in her heart that did it? I don't know.
I think
And
it'd be a
maybe,
different conversation if somebody, I think one of the examples was like if a daughter came home and the father didn't know that she was coming home and he shot her, or if it
right.
was somebody who wasn't in a uniform, would we be having these same conversations?
Yeah, well, thank you. That reminds me of another thing because all throughout hearing about this case and how people were talking about Guyger, and just seems like any sort of little bit of tidbit, whether it had to do with this or not, the fact that she was a police officer was kind of reason for them to be like, yeah, convict her and throw her away for as long as possible because she's a cop and she did a lot of bad stuff. I kept thinking about when Slappy and I had James Nixon on the podcast and talking about how they tried to, railroad him with kind of the non sequiturs, things that weren't directly, didn't have direct links to what he was being tried for. And we're sitting there saying, well, no, he wasn't on trial for smoking PCP. He was on trial for smoking or for being in a drug ring. So you can't convict him for that. You can't take the other things that you don't like about him and use that as reason to put him behind bars. So if we turn around and do the same thing for Amber Guyger or, police officer ABC, we don't really have a leg to stand on when we turn around and when it's someone that we want to keep out of prison, we would just be contradicting ourselves. And I mean, that's what we got to be. It's uncomfortable, and I know we want to. It's very easy to want to say like, yeah, we should throw cops, but cops are bad. They do a lot of bad things. But I mean, if you play the game of, bringing in these little tangential reasons to do it, then we can't not use that for when it's used against us.
Right. I think that it's important to remember that prosecuting Amber Guyger is going to do absolutely nothing to change. It's going to do nothing to ameliorate the conditions that lead to police violence. And when these things happen, when you see somebody, I guess, like when you see somebody murdering somebody, your reaction shouldn't be to get on that person's level. It should be, like empathy should be at the heart of all struggles for liberation. I think that we should take a second and be better than that because the state is violence, and I don't think that we should be either. We should be violence.
Yeah, I completely agree. We're stooping to their level, using violence to solve problems when we say we don't use violence. So this bloodlust is what it is when people say when there's a crime committed, um, they just say, yeah, we should just kill. They killed someone, and people say this regardless of whether it was a police officer or not. They murdered someone and they should be put to death too. And it's like, man, what do you get out of that?
Yeah.
Like other than just like this satisfying your bloodlust. I don't know. I don't think that's healthy. Going back to what I was saying, like we need something else to kind of help us live the good life. Um, I don't think bloodlust is helping you live the good life. It's very having that anger, having that hatred build up in you is not good. And I know people might be sitting there saying, "Oh, it's easy for you to be the armchair quarterback that you criticized before." But I mean, I have been in. My family has been the victim of a crime where someone died. I don't talk. I brought it up a little over 100 episodes ago. I don't talk about it much. But I was in the where you mentioned earlier about the when the families were given their statements and how emotional it was. I was in a courtroom during the sentencing and listened to you know parents of a girl who was killed by someone's poor decisions, and you know it was the worst day of my life sitting in that room dealing with, and I saw the person that did the killing, and that's who I was reminded of when I saw Amber Guyger, just this utterly broken human being. And this was before, I think I was like 21 at the time. This is about 10 years ago. This is before I was really a libertarian, before I had I was a libertarian, didn't think anywhere close to what I think about the court system and this stuff now. But I remember sitting there being like, I don't know a what a prison sentence is going to do to fix any of this. I mean, I think I was looking at this girl who was the convict in this case and thinking like she's serving her punishment right now. And you mentioned about how Brandt didn't say anything to his family about how he felt and what he was going to say, and the amount of courage that takes is just flooring, because it took me years before I could say anything to my family about how I felt about that. And it wasn't even my family member who was the one that was dead. It was my family member was severely injured in this thing. But it's it's not exactly the easiest psychological thing, I guess is the point. One of the
Right.
points I'm trying to make is that there's a ton of emotion, and all I remember was just like, I just want this to stop. I want this to all disappear, go away. Um, I didn't. It was weird. I don't want to make this about me, but I think it's worthwhile talking about it because it. I could say I put my money where my mouth is a little bit. For the longest time, I did not. I didn't hate the girl that did what she did, and but I also could never really forgive her until I read the book Resist Not Evil by Clarence Darrow. And I remember reading the one part about how these criminals are just like treated as not human anymore. And that's when it all kind of like came together for me. And it was through reading that book is what finally allowed me to forgive the girl that committed the crime against my family and my family's friend. And that was a weight off my shoulders that was unbelievable. Um, it kind of allows you to have a little bit of peace with yourself. So for those criticizing Brant for what he did, and there's been all from all sides saying, I think some pretty ignorant stuff
Yeah.
about him. It's I think he's going to live a more peaceful life than anyone else who holds anger and hatred in their heart. It is not helpful. It is destructive. Being able to forgive is a lot better. And so maybe that's why I'm so impressed by what he did, was that he was able to do it in a situation much worse than mine, and do it way more quickly than I could. So it's yeah.
I am extremely thankful. I watched the whole trial live, and that day, the sentencing, I just felt so angry like the whole day. Like, when people were making those cheap shots, I'm just like, yeah, hit her with the book or whatever they say.
Right.
And there's all the time with like with prison abolition, like reading just the different materials, people say that people who claim to be all about the victims only really are all about the victims if they conform to their values. And I
Hmm.
didn't really understand that until I saw people, like I shared with you guys one of the messages that I got where somebody was just like, "Oh no, if that was my brother, I would assault her and set her on fire." And just I was so disgusted, and I just thought I'm really grateful to be able to see just this incredible act of forgiveness. And that doesn't mean that's not like, it's not, forgiveness isn't required for accountability. It's just something that's incredibly personal. And I just think that maybe he shouldn't be criticized for those actions. And
Yeah.
I'm really grateful that I got to witness it.
Yeah, it's like I was saying earlier, it really kind of rocked my world, and it made me take a step back and say, you know, if he can express that compassion and forgiveness, then what am I doing here?
Right.
Acting like a, you know, whatever, however I was acting. And maybe we should start treating these people, because I mean, forgiveness is easy when it's not really required, or when it's something small. But when it's something like that, I mean, that's when we really need it, right? I mean,
Right.
what good is it if it's, oh, you accidentally cut me off in line. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's okay. It's all right. Forgive you. You know, that's not really forgiveness. But I don't know. I just think that I'll reiterate it again, that I mean, he's a role model, and that's someone that you should look up to, and you might not think that you're able to do it right now, and that's okay. I mean, nobody's perfect. I'm not saying that I could sit there and do what he did, because it's unbelievable. Like, just to put it into, um, even just to go back to my story, to make it so if people don't have this perspective at all, if you're fortunate enough to never have to go through anything like this. When I say I didn't like forgive the girl, it wasn't even like I wasn't like I said, I wasn't really angry, but I couldn't even like think the words in my head, I forgive you. It was weird. It was just like there was a block there. Um, so for him to go in front of that many people, in front of his family, and do that is just, it's unbelievable. At least from
Right.
my perspective. So
I think, go ahead.
No, I was gonna change the talk about something else if you had something that you were gonna tack onto that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, this isn't like a defense of cops. I mean, I want to abolish police
Yep.
altogether. I just think that if I started trying to change my language a little bit on how I talked about police after listening to some of the stuff. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but Rayford Davis.
Hmm.
Just some of the stuff that he says, I tried to start focusing more on the system and like the profession, not the individual person. And I think that if we're going to change minds and bring more people on board, we're going to have to meet people where they are. And saying that you're going to set a woman on fire, like that's not attractive.
Right.
There was one guy who messaged me he's kind of like on the fence, I guess, for libertarianism. And I think, it can be said that if you support government, government is violence and all that other stuff. But he thought that the violence, it was just like a turnoff from the ideology. And that made me a little sad just because that's not what we're about. We're not about killing. We want to live in a society where violence isn't necessary and isn't always the answer, and something important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about how bad this criminal justice system is, and it doesn't solve anything. So, when they get a conviction that we kind of approve of, how much do we celebrate it? Does it, it's still this criminal justice system is still doing the same bad things that it does everywhere. Not saying that, if they find someone guilty of stealing your tractor, that you know, they say, oh, you're owed restitution. That's not the correct outcome. Uh, but they often tack on a lot more stuff than just that. So it's really difficult, and that's unfortunate. It's the unfortunate reality that we live in a broken world, and we live in an imperfect world. And I don't know, given the world that we live in, with the government we have, with the culture that it is, with everything that we have, I don't think there's really a good outcome that comes out of most situations. Just the structures aren't there to have it. So it makes it very difficult. And people always, whenever you have a situation, people want to always be able to point to something and say, no, this is the right thing. This is what we should do. And if you get, people like to win. And so, being able to put a cop behind bars for a crime they committed, that's very appealing to take that as a win. But if we really take a step back and see what is going on, what that quote unquote win really means, was there actually anything that was winnable in this situation to begin with? I don't know that there is, and it's disappointing. It's frustrating to think that way, but um, you know,
That reminds me of like another important abolitionist principle, and that's, rooting for more prison time for the privileged people who aren't the intended victims of the prison industrial complex. That's only going to harm people who are underprivileged and who are targeted by the prison industrial complex. So when you see these, I guess, these memes comparing like Ross Ulbricht's prison sentence with Amber Guyger's, sentencing Amber Guyger longer isn't going to help Ross at
right?
all. We should be
Yeah,
focusing, I guess, we shouldn't increase human misery to level the playing field. We should be focused on decreasing human misery.
no, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because I saw a lot about that. People saying, "Oh, she only got 10 years," and people who just smoke a couple ounces of weed are in there for way longer. I mean, we're just trying to make it fair. You're not being fair. It's like we talk about taxation and we don't say because let's say you get a 10% tax rate and I have a 30% tax rate. I don't sit there and say, well, you should be taxed at 30% too. That'll make it fair. No, we say
Right.
taxes should be zero. We're not fighting for equal taxation. We're fighting for justice. So yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point to bring up. Um, that we're not, especially trying to to shoot up to where the other things are is probably not that great of a strategy. So it's and again, it's tough. I mean, we always want to be able to point to something and say like, this is the correct solution that we can get to. But I don't think until we have the things in place that allow us other real solutions. And check out well, I'll try to link to it again. I always forget to link to half the stuff I say I'm going to link to. But Clark Campett on the Friends Against Government podcast just had J.W. Weatherman on Sloppy Seconds to talk about kind of that technological improvement that needs to be made to take that step to be able to get the things that we want to remove the government from society and everything. So it's going to be frustrating until we get to that point. But I mean, I don't to use a phrase from J.W. Weatherman, sometimes you just got to stare into the dark abyss of reality and say that there is no good solution right now. So that's kind of it's a little bit depressing.
I think a really
like,
good, I guess maybe you could link to it in the show notes, a really good article to read is Killing Dylan Roof by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And this is, a black prison abolitionist fighting for Dylan Roof, who shot up a black church, and the state wanted to put him to death, and he was fighting for him. And I think that these are the kinds of conversations that they suck and they're depressing, but we have to have them. And the more people talk about them, the more we might actually figure out some solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are really good stories within that, like finding out about the Dallas, like getting the mental health crisis teams to respond to calls. I felt pretty uplifted by that solution.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There are. Yeah. That's a good example of that. While I'm being Mr. Thunderstorms and rain clouds, there are some good things that we can do, and that's a great example of it. So, yeah, I'll definitely link that in the show notes page. You did send that to me, and it was a great read. And it's funny that he really put the nail on its head, talking about how the state is violence and that's what they do. Even though Obama and other people were praising the victims about how they were being so compassionate and forgiving, and then he turns around and commits all the violence he does, and they're seeking the death penalty. It's really really just shows what the state is. And it's just violence. That's why we need to get rid of it, so we can actually find good solutions to everyone's problems.
I think I really loved when he was talking about how all of these people, the Philip Brailsfords and the Amber Guygers of the world, they're only acting in the spirit of the state. And even if nonviolence isn't always the answer, we should be working towards a world where it is. I just really liked that.
Yeah.
Because it is a trap that people do fall into when they are okay with destroying people's lives because they don't like them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that I think as libertarians, we got to be real careful about, is we can't just, we tend to, cops do bad things and they make us angry for doing it because for good reason. But, yeah, we just got to be careful that the anger that we express and the consequences, or how we get those consequences, might end up backfiring on us, because we are using the same court system, and these court systems do set precedents. So it's a tough road to hoe.
Right. I prepared a free market success story.
Oh, nice. Good. Because I was going to have kind of a tenuous one at best. So that's good. I was wondering, because we never tell our guests that, like, oh, we're going to put you on the spot and have a free market success story. So, yeah, let's go for it.
Yesterday on Twitter, Anti-Taxer, I was talking about how I was going to be on the roll in Slappy Show, and he was like, you should prepare a free market success story. And so it's really kind of dumb, but it's just Uber Eats. I get a little nervous before podcasts, and like on my own podcast, I don't talk very often, but if I drink a lot of coffee, I do a little better. So
Nice.
I was able to just order a coffee beforehand and talk more because of the
Perfect.
caffeine.
That's awesome. My free market success story was actually one of, I'm on travel for work this week in the fabulous downtown Dover, Delaware. So I got at the hotel tonight and I needed to eat dinner. So I was looking around for restaurants and I found this place that was walkable distance that was an El Salvadoran restaurant. So I'm like, ooh, I've never had that before. That sounds pretty good. So I walk in and the first room I walk in, there's no one in there. It's empty. So I kind of go around the corner and I go into this other dining room where they have a bar and it's empty again. And there's kind of the hostess booth is up there. And there's just like this Hispanic music blasting in there, just not a soul to be found. I'm standing there for a couple minutes and finally a girl who works there walks in and she's like looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, one please. And she just like nods her head and like, no. I'm like, can I eat? And she's, no. Just like acting like you know, I don't, it was weird. It was weird. Like acting like I was the biggest idiot in the world for asking to be seated at a restaurant that had the open sign flashing outside. And I was like, are you not open? And she was kind of like, again, mostly not English. Kind of being like, nah. She said, oh, La Tienda, or that was like a place in the same building outside. So I was like, oh, I guess she's telling me to go to that restaurant. That ended up being like a supermarket cell phone store kind of thing. So so I eventually just went to another place and they were able to serve me. So it's just nice that that wasn't the only restaurant in the area. So I was fed. But I like your free market success story a lot more. I really just told that just so I could be self-deprecating that I think I got what's it called? Just owned by a little El Salvadorian girl. Just like looked at me and said, "Nah, not today, not today, bozo." So
It's
yeah,
pretty, I mean, all the restaurant options in any given area, I think that's a pretty good example of the free market.
yeah. There's a lot around. Unfortunately, it's mostly they just kind of like chain stuff. So it's like, oh, I go someplace different. I don't know. It's Dover, Delaware. It's not really a much of a destination, but you know,
The
get something
capital of
out.
Mexican food.
Yeah. Oh. Uh, but I have never seen an El Salvadoran restaurant, so something different. Oh well, that's something I have to keep on the list to do one day. Hopefully they don't kick me out of the next one I go to. So can you tell us where people can find you? You mentioned your podcast, and can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm a co-host on the E-Militia podcast. It's more relaxed, I guess. We just kind of, it's a few co-hosts. We just talk about like current events, and I did with them an episode on if you want like way more details and specifics on the Amber Guyger trial, you can go check out that episode. I think it was pretty good. Um, and then you can follow me on Instagram at Empress of Meme, no S at the end. I have a Twitter, but it's just like a few people that I let follow me because it's not really anything important.
So yeah, Mel, thanks a lot for coming on. I think this is an important conversation to have. I think we may, or yeah, I'll speak for myself. This case and really what Brant said and did really made me think about how I need to recalibrate how I approach this stuff and try to live by his example a little bit more. So far
Same.
from perfect on it, and it'll be difficult. So anyone out there who sees me contradicting myself, feel free to give me a little kick in the butt when it happens. We need to look out for each other and stay on the straight and narrow. So thanks a lot for coming on. Really appreciate it. You're always welcome. Welcome anytime.
Thank you. Glad to be able to talk about this. It's an important conversation.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week. And man, I was gonna make fun of Slappy, but I blanked on the word I wanted to say. Yeah,
Go buy a
whatever.
Liberty mug.
Yeah, we'll do that. All right, we'll catch you next week. Peace.